So what we have is a contract type is a purchasing contract, the date, the vendor, some purchase org and group information, currency. We got a validity period. And then as part of this purchasing contract, it's a quantity contract. We've got some items and quantities and amounts. And then in this particular one, we're using Cost Center for the account assignment. I have another example where we're just simply using the unknown and there's no account assignment information. So just like you would with a transaction, you'd come in here in Excel, you'd go ahead and log in. So I've already logged in. And I have a BAPI that I've used, I've included as part of the script name. And you'll notice there are some options that are not enabled and other options that are. And as part of this, you'll see that validate is not available. Validate's very tied to the specific transaction. So what I've done is I've created another, whoops, it's in this other one. Let me hop over to the right one. Yeah, I've created a test run script. And basically there's an option in this particular BAPI to do a test run. So if there are any errors, you can check that out ahead of time. So I'm going to simply click run and choose my system. And then it will do a test run. And it's simply a little option. We'll take a look at it later how that option gets enabled. So you'll see this particular one, the messages are going to be a little different, and we'll talk a little more about differences later, but you'll see that there aren't any errors. And since it is a test run, there's no purchasing document created. But this particular one has an error in it, so the vendor has not been created. And we can go ahead and make a correction and then just reprocess the ones that failed. And again, this is a script that specifically is validating. Now I've also built into this script, just like you can with transactions, you can make fields required, so the ones with the asterisk are required. You can also have lookup values, so this one has lookup values built into it, so if I wanted to choose a specific contract type, I can use lookup values and so forth. So this one is did the test run, everything looks good, so now I'm going to hop over to the script to actually create the contract and click run. So, you know, for the end user, they may or may not really know whether this is a transaction or a BAPI, although the messages are a little different, but they basically will just see that it's created. So there we have the contract, and I'm going to hop here into SAP, and we'll take a look at the contract. So there are my materials and quantities, and we'll take a look at some of the header information that we passed in, including the purchase org, the agreement date, and the validity period. So just a quick example. Again, we're going to concentrate on actually billing them out. So this other one, like I said, had a little bit more information with the account assignments. This one I didn't build in a test run, although I could have, and I'm just going to go ahead and create those as well. And you'll see that, again, this one just simply had the account assignments for a cost center. So you'll see that these also got created. And again, we'll take a look at how that got created in a little bit. Okay, so what do we have to do as preparation to use Direct? With transaction, which is the most commonly used tool, you have to know how to navigate through the transaction and the fields you want to touch. With Direct, it's a little more work. So you'll want to search for a BAPI. I tend to do a Google search, and I tend to land in the SAP community site, and I'll search for BAPI. I can use the T code name. You can search for functionality like BAPI and purchasing contract. So being able to find a BAPI is part of it. You can also do searches in SAP. You want to review the documentation if there's documentation, and most have documentation. And then you want to test it. And you'll test it either in SE37 or the BAPI code. And you want to know which fields are required, and you want to know where the fields are that you want to include. So I tend to use SE37. So for developers, you'll want to have access to SE37 to be able to test it out, see what fields are there, and be able to test out your particular scenario before you actually try to build it out in Direct. With Direct, rather than the record map or run of transaction, we do basically a selection and distillation. So again, a BAPI or a function module is a program. What's a program? It's a bunch of inputs and outputs. So you're going to pick which inputs and outputs you want to expose to the Excel file. Then you want to map them and run it. And within Studio, there's a couple of different steps here. So there's the search and exploring for the BAPI. There's selecting and organizing the fields, and we'll talk about what that means as we go through some examples. Then we'll map, test, and publish, which should be very familiar for anybody that's created transaction scripts. And then the runner is just simply going to select that Excel file like I just showed you and fill it with data and run it. So there's 3 different examples that I want to get to today. I'll build the first 2 from scratch. We'll see if we have enough time to build a 3rd one from scratch. Otherwise, I'll just open them up. And I would like to, for this first one, go into an HRT code. And if I pull up an employee, you'll see that they have a ton of different information related to them. There's a lot of different tables. In particular, with the organizational assignment, there's a number of tables that have to get added multiple times related to the position and the name and the manager and the org unit and the job that it's associated with. So instead of trying to write a query, what I'd like to do is show you a BAPI that we found. And let me pull it up. So I'm going to click display, and I'm not going to, it's going to show you the BAPI code, and I typically don't look at any of that. I first come here to attributes and make sure it's remote enabled. Now if it's truly a BAPI as opposed to a function module, and just so you know, sometimes it has the name BAPI in the name of the function module, but it's actually a function module. It has to be remote enabled in order for us to use it. And you can take a look at, basically some of the fields here for import and export, as well as tables. But I typically click on this little wrench that says test execute, and this is going to allow me to test it out. So this one is really simple, and I wanted to use it just to start off simply. So this one requires the username and a validity date. Now, if you've run through this before or somebody else has, you can save test data. So I've saved some test data here, and I'll be showing you more of that on another example. So we'll just fill the inputs, and we'll click run. So execute here, and you'll see all of the outputs. So this one's really simple. 2 input fields and a lot of different fields that it's going to output, including the business area, the personnel area and sub area, the employee group and subgroup, all of the description fields, the org unit and the name of the org unit. There's some payroll information, their first and last name, the language, the company, and so forth. So a lot of great information in here. So now that we know how the BAPI works, we can take this information and come in here in Studio. So I'm going to open up Studio, and we'll create a new direct script. Let's give it a minute while it opens. There we go. So instead of transaction or query, I'm coming over here to direct. So we'll create from a BAPI, we'll log in. And we'll go ahead and click create. And then it's going to give me basically a workspace here to find the BAPI or function module. And so this one, the search differentiates between the BAPI and the function module, and I know that this is a function module. If I don't remember the exact name, I can use some wildcards to do a search. And then it's going to list them all for me. Now either one of these will work. This is the one that I showed you, so I'm going to pick this one. And you know, if there were any other information, it would show it here. And I'll choose create from selected BAPI. Now, you can skip fetching field descriptions, but I like seeing field descriptions if there are any. So here we go. This one doesn't have field descriptions. So this is laid out a little differently than what we saw in SE37. So for the input structure, all I want to do is choose the username and the validity begin date. So those will be my input fields. And then I can come here to this other area with all the output fields. And I can search. So I'm searching on code, and I can choose company code and name a company code. And I can also scroll through the list, or I can say select all. And basically I'm done with that actual portion of it. So now I can come to the mapping part. And the mapping part should look an awful lot like it does with transaction. So I will drag down my message column. I want username in B, and I want the validity date in C, and the rest of these will all be output fields. So I'm just going to select all of them, and we'll start those in column D. And it's now mapping everything. I want to make username required. There we go. And validity date required. So the mapping portion's pretty simple. And then we'll come over here and fill in some names. So I'll use Max. And I'll throw in one that's wrong. And then we need a validity date, so I'll do equal today. Now this defaults to the wrong format, so I want to come in here and format it to be actually a date. There we go. So we'll go ahead and click run. It wants me to save them both. And now the BAPI will run for me. So this one the user wasn't found, and this one the user wasn't found. Let me see. I'll find another one. We can just rerun the ones that failed. So this one is now filled in, and as I scroll through here, you're going to see all the fields that are part of the output for this particular BAPI. Again, this one's pretty simple. There's only 2 input fields, and there's a whole lot of output fields, but it's one way that you can approach getting employee type information out of SAP. So now I want to go to another example that's related to Material Master, and I would like to actually go to the Material Master first. So we've got a lot of different views that are defined for the materials. Some have classification, some don't. So we've got our typical basic data, sales data, plant, purchasing, all that fun stuff. And these are fairly simple to script in transaction. But if we come over here to additional data, there's no way here to find or search for a specific line. So if I wanted to come, and update the German description for this material, I would have to use GUI scripting. And the same thing for units of measure, the same thing for any kind of UPCs. So this is one area where using a BAPI comes in really handy. And a lot of people like using the material BAPIs anyway. So let's go into SE37. And there's a great BAPI that SAP provides to work with it. Again, this is a function module and it is remote enabled, so I always double check there, and then we can go into the test run. Now this one has a whole lot of data in it, and the first time I tried to run it I was pretty darn confused. So let's start off a little bit simply, and what I want to do is update the material descriptions that you saw in the additional data. So as you look through all of these import parameters, there's header data, and that's typically where you would have things like a material number. So if I come in here, I can put in the material number. Now we'll go through what some of these other ones are in a minute. And now I need to search for the descriptions. So, you know, you could look here and go, yeah, it's not there, although I'm seeing like material number and document, so that's not where I want to go. And then as I scroll down here, you'll see, oh, there's material description, there's units of measure, there's the UPCs, long text, taxes. So this is the area that I really need to concentrate on. So we have, in order to see more fully what the columns are here, you'll see that there's an ISO language, like DE for German and EN for English, and a description. So I want to type in a description, and if you want to do more than one just to test it out, you can add a row. So now I've got an English description and a German description, and then I can back out. So I've got the material number and I've got the material descriptions. And I'm going to click to execute to see what happens, what kind of message do I get back. And I'm going to scroll down here, and you'll see that the material is either created or extended. And I like to call this, and some people call this an upsert. It updates if it exists. It extends if it doesn't. So if you were either updating a view or extending, you know, the view didn't exist already, it would create the view for you. If it did exist, it would update the view for you. So just based on the material number and the material description, this would work. Now I wanted to show you a little bit about what I call these shadow tables or X tables, and so I want to just add very simply a little bit of basic data. So I'm going to come here to the client data, and what I want is the document number, the document type, and the document version, which is on basic data 2. So we'll choose a document number, and this is the document type, and this is the document version. And normally I would say execute, and that's what I did the first time I tried this, but this particular BAPI works differently. It has what are called X tables, and they're basically built, what you want to do is say, and you can't find them here by visually looking at them, I want to find my document number, and out of all the fields that are possible, I only want to pass these 3. So in the X table version here, we want to put an X for each field we want to pass to SAP. So I have 3 fields in client data: document number, document type, and document version. So I want to put an X in these fields that correspond to the other client data table. These are the 3 fields I'm going to pass. And if you'll look at this, for plant data, there's a plant data and a plant data X, and a forecast and a forecast X, a planning and planning X. There's even one for units of measure and a units of measure X. So whenever you see these X tables, you'll know that for every field that I select in the storage location data, I want to put an X in the X tables that correspond to those fields. And this way the program looks for the X's and says, okay, these are the only fields that I'm going to be interacting with. So it's basically like a filter, if you will. So again, we've got material number and head data. We've got some values in client data. We've got some X's here in client data X. And we have some material descriptions. So that's what I want to build next. And we'll come back here and go to Direct and create from BAPI. And we'll create the script. And this is a function module, so I know it's material, and there's a like save data in it. I never remember the exact name. So here we go. This is the name of the function module. And I'm going to create from that BAPI. Now, this one's much bigger than that original one we saw for reading the HR data, so this will take a little bit of time to populate. Just so you know, I can also take a look at the documentation for the BAPI. So here is the overall documentation. You can also swap to, if I were to come here to client data, I could say show me the documentation for this table if there is any, and this one doesn't have much. But if I wanted to also then look at a specific field, if a field had documentation, I could click here if there was documentation on a specific field and show it. So this documentation at the BAPI level, at the table level, which again is a grouping of fields, and for a specific field itself. So we know in head data we have to put in the material number. Now if I was creating one, I'd want to select a bunch of data here. So I'm going to choose material number, and in fact I need to have the basic data view because that's part of the data that I'm updating. So those are the two fields we need here. Then I'm going to client data, and what I want is the document number, type, and version. And you see this particular one has the nice descriptive names so that we know which field. And again, if I wanted to do a search to narrow it down, I could do that. You can also sort, so you can sort by description, you can sort by name. There's a lot of friendly ways to find those fields. But again, going to SAP first to know which fields you want and where they are is important. So here's my X table, or what I call the shadow table. So I want to make sure that I choose these as well. And then what I want to do is go to the material descriptions, and I want to choose the language code and the material description. So again, you know, head data, the client data along with the X, and this one shows you the number of fields, so you know that you're in sync. If I have 3 fields in this client data, I need 3 fields here in the X table. And then for the description, I just need 2 fields. And for this, we're doing an update. Typically, you're going to want to use a commit required as a little checkbox, and it simply says, once these updates are done, save it to SAP. So now if we come to the mapper, we'll basically see all the fields we've selected, but in the case of the descriptions, it'll be a loop. So I want to come over here to Expert View, and in Expert View, this looks a lot like Expert View for transaction, but there's no OK codes or screen names. These are the actual structure names, if you will, that come from the BAPI itself. So I want my message in A, and I want material number. This one is just simply selecting the view, so I want to fix it to be X. And you'll see here's my client data, which relates to basic data. So this is my input, and when I see the X ones, I just want to keep them fixed, and those will all be X. And that tells the program these are the fields I'm uploading. So now I'm going to map my document number, my type, and whoops, and my version. So we have that. Now we have for the description, it automatically puts in a loop for us, but we need to tell it what column and what my or my header and detail lines will look like. So I'll click on my loop, and I want it to start in F, and I'll use H for the header and D for the detail. And those loops are much like you would have in transaction. And so now I'm going to map my language and my description. So that's it. And if we came back here to basic view, you basically see all the fixed fields and all the map fields. And then you can come in here and make things required. So we'll just make material number required. So again, we're going to pass up document number, type, and version, and then we'll have a set of languages and descriptions. So let me make these a little bit tighter. So I'll go ahead and type in some data, and then here and I'll put in another detail line. Excuse my spelling, and I'm using the wrong material number here. And it's always good to do a couple of rows, although with BAPIs there's a little less variance in the way that they behave, and I'm going to do more than one. But again, with a BAPI, there's less of a chance of the first transaction behaving differently than the second one, because again, this is a program. Whoops. So I got my test data in there, and I've got a couple of files. I could have just opened those, but there we go. So we have our material, our document number, type, and version, and then we'll loop through the different descriptions. So I'll go ahead and click run. I'll save both of these. And now the BAPI will run it, and we should get the material has been created or extended, much like we saw when we were executing it. I've got one locked, so there we go. I'm actually in this particular one, which locks this material. So let me get out, and I'll rerun the one that failed. Now, much like I had in the example with the purchasing contract, I could have created basically a version of this that would allow you to validate, so one that doesn't commit. So you'll see both of these have posted. So let me go to MMO3, and we'll take a look at what I've changed. So you'll have, there's my document, type, and version. If we go to additional data, there's my English and my Deutsch descriptions that have been updated. And if you were to go to display changes, this one may have a whole bunch, so it might take a moment. My credentials are still being used just like a transaction would. So all of the logging and tracking of who made what changes and when. You'll see this is, I'm in Pacific time, so if I come in here, it's showing me what the old and new values were here, as well as the different document type, number, and version. So these were all the changes I just made through the BAPI. And my credentials were used, and it tracks the date and time, just like a transaction would. Oops. So we'll bail out of that. So there was the third example, or the second example, to create and or update materials. So this particular BAPI has a ton of information in it, and it can be used to create and update just about any part of the material master that you might have. And it's one that I've used an awful lot, and it comes in handy. And for any of you that are on that might have posted questions related to material master and issues with scripting that on the community site, I invite you to take a look. So this third example is for a purchasing contract, and I do want to show you in SE37. Again, this question came directly from the community site. And we'll take a look, and it's remote enabled. So we'll go ahead and execute. And what I want to show you is this test directory, because if you've ever come through here and you've tried it out and you figured out which fields it is that you need to accomplish what you want, you might have to revisit this 6 months from now or 2 years from now, and you may not remember. So what you can do is have a test directory of your tests, and it basically saves the data entries that you've made. So I'm going to choose one, and this is the one for the purchasing contract that I showed earlier. So there's header data in this one as well, as well as these X tables. So let's take a look at what I filled in. So here we've got the document type, we've got a vendor, purchase org, and group, currency, the doc date, the validity date. And again, if you're not sure what these actual column names are, you can come in here and look for them. And like if I wanted to position myself on purchase org, I can click on it. I can also come here and hit Control F if there's a ton of fields and just say I want to find something called, perch. There we go. And it's going to find it. Then I know where it is. Again, if I click on it, it's going to position it here in what might be a long list of fields. So these are the fields that I have in the header. And because this one has an X table, or what I call shadow table, I also have to come in here and put in X's for the fields that I wanted to use. So this one has a doc type, and it's got the vendor, there's the V, and it's got the purchasing organ group, so we got that, as well as the currency, and then it's got the doc date, and then the start and end validity date, so that's where all the X's are. That's probably the hardest part, particularly here in SE37. And then I have items. So I have to put in an item number, and I have material. And as I scroll over here to the right, I've got a target quantity because this is the quantity contract. I've got a price. And then this one is the account assignment. It took me a minute to find it, but again, I can do my little trick here to find it. So there's account assignment. And if I click on it, you know, it basically will position me. So this one also has an X table or shadow table version. So this one also requires a matching item number to match with the previous table, and then you would put X's in the fields that you're going to use. I'm going to hop over to this other example with the account assignment. So with the account assignment, I have the same header data in the X's, the same item data with the X's. But in this case, I've also got account information. So I've got a GL account, a cost center, and in this case, it requires that the profit center also be entered. So that slightly different behavior from what a T code might do. And then I have the X version of that. So again, these X tables, if you will, are fairly prevalent in various types of BAPIs. So once I've filled in my header data and the X's, the item data with the X's, in this case I have account assignments, I can go ahead and execute and it will try it out. So if I get a purchasing document number, which is not committed, so when you're testing this here, this one is not committed, it's just a test, it's basically going to let you know that you have all of the correct fields selected. So rather than building that all from scratch, what I want to do is just show you what that one looks like. So we'll go ahead and I'm going to find it here. So here's one of them. And I already did the search for the BAPI. And you'll notice again it's really simple to find where you've actually selected fields by these counts. So in the header I've got document type, the create date, create by, vendor, I've got purchase organ group, currency, doc date, and then effectivity dates. And then I have the corresponding X tables or X fields selected for my header. If I scroll up to item, I've got the quantity, I've got the price, and then I've got an item number and material. And if I go to the X version of that, I've got the same field selected. And as part of the output, as you saw as in the BAPI, there's also an output field that allows you to download the purchasing document number so you don't have to extract it out of the messages. Let me make sure. Yeah, so there was that purchasing document, and there's a number of other fields that you could output. So this is part of the output. So you could output a lot of different data. I'm going to execute out of that. So in the mapper here, because I had multiple tables, what it did by default is it created a loop around the item, and then it created a loop around the X table, a separate loop. And so I just simply deleted the loop around the X table and expanded the initial loop, because these both have a similar number of rows. So for every item row, I'll have a single X row, if you will. And I've mapped the item number for the X table to the same column as the item number for the actual item data. So when these loops get inserted, you can delete them, you can combine them where it makes sense. If I had the accounting fields, as long as I only have one account assignment, I could also include the account assignment in the same loop. Otherwise, I could have a separate loop where you might have multiple account assignments for each row. And then I have the purchasing document as the output field. And again, you can make fields required. You can provide, this one had the list of values, so here, this is where my list of values came from. And these would all be local checks, so when you were to try to run this, because there really isn't a validate corresponding to a BAPI, because validate works with a T code, you can do a check data, which is going to check, and you'll see success here to make sure that data is complete and correct. So for example, if I were to delete this one and check again, it's going to tell you this column is missing a value. There's the potential values, and I could do a lookup value based on the potential values that I built into the script. So it's always going to do a local check first, then it will do a check against SAP. And this one also has, come back here real quick. This one has a test run, so you can put an X here and it becomes the equivalent of a validate. You can also uncheck this commit required and create a script that will make it essentially a validate script. So it won't actually post anything to SAP. It'll just simply check the data. So those are a couple of things that you can do to mitigate the whole validate limitation.